There are lots of downsides to single-family homes, suburban single-family home lifestyle that have not been fully explored in balance with the presumed benefits of it. It sort of boils down to social, economic, and environmental factors that could be mitigated by people living more communally, people living closer to each other. We haven't really given people many other options for how to become financially self-sufficient other than investing in buying homes. I'm Diana Lind, the author of Brave New Home, Our Future in Smarter, Simpler, Happier Housing. I'm also the executive director of the Arts and Business Council for Greater Philadelphia. For much of American history, the idea of a home and your shelter were interchangeable. It was a place to rest your head, but it also might be a source of community, a place that you were with your family, the place where you worked. Because people lived for much of American history in live-work environments. They lived right above their store, their shop. People lived in boarding homes. They might have, their own private bedroom, but share a building, or they might be a boarder in someone else's home. And so there were many different styles of living, even into the early 1900s in the US. But the idea of a home being something much more became sort of an aspiration, source of wealth creation, really started in the period following World War I. There were both government incentives to move out of overcrowded cities, and there were media campaigns to encourage owning their own home, essentially as a way of being a better American, that you would be a better parent, that your family would be better off if you owned your own home. And the Own Your Own Home campaign, literally, helped to spur this idea of people living in their own homes, separate from other generations of their family, separate from kin or friends, and to think about their home as this source of financial stability. The inherent focus of your life's aspirations, and also it being a commodity, have just inherently always been at odds in the US. And what we've found is that over time, as people have tried to both protect property values, privacy, housing prices have also gone up. People have moved further and further away from their neighbors. We have made it very difficult to build multifamily housing in much of the US. We have built a culture that prides itself on self-sufficiency for a long period of time. That really got turbocharged by people recognizing that if you pair that idea of self-sufficiency with a home and a 30-year mortgage, a fairly new financial innovation post-war period, but you could have the home essentially serve as a way to accumulate wealth, and by investing in your home symbolized a certain amount of financial discipline, Puritan value perhaps, that has been a part of the US for a long period of time. Investing in your home and building wealth through it, I think we've developed a series of financial tools that really support that over the past century, but by comparison, we've given very little thought to alternatives there might potentially be. The idea of being self-sufficient, we haven't really given people many other options for how to become financially self-sufficient other than investing in buying homes. I think there's been this perception that the interest in single-family homes has always been market-driven, but actually I think it's been primarily government-driven by virtue of the fact that it's the dominant zoning type that's been allowed in most residential areas. We have encouraged single-family homes by building highways in neighborhoods with multifamily buildings. There are certain messages that the government was sending, both in terms of what kind of housing was valued and what neighborhoods are really trying to develop.
This negative perception of multifamily zoning or shared living, where did that come from? Why does America have such a distaste for it? Is it because of that Jacob Riis book highlighting tenement housing, the bad taste of density, or is it because of the 1918 pandemic, or what's the why does America not want to share space?
There were legitimately parts of cities that were overcrowded in the early parts of the 20th century. In many of these cases, these were low-income neighborhoods where immigrants lived. If you are seeing that these are overcrowded tenements and public health issues that are related to that, first of all, this wasn't dignified living, and we could do better than that. But then secondly, there were many other people who would say they wanted to escape that living environment. That's sort of an image of crowded multifamily housing that you have from the beginning of the 20th century. And then when you get to the creation of isolated, large public housing projects, again, then people have a bad stigma against multifamily buildings. And even decades later, we have trouble overcoming, because so often we associate wealth and social success with living in a suburban single-family home, which is pretty much the physical opposite of those kinds of multifamily buildings.
What are some of the, negative implications or downsides of single-family home ownership highlighted or found in your research?
There are lots of downsides to single-family homes, suburban single-family home lifestyle, that have not been fully explored in balance with the presumed benefits of it. To start with, the ways in which single-family homes occupy a lot of space. So in some ways a really good thing, because it gives people a lot of privacy and space, but it then becomes a bad thing. It discourages people from living in walkable neighborhoods where they can access their daily amenities on foot or by bike. It require people to travel by car primarily. It pushes a lot of people further and further out of city boundaries into nature and at risk of wildfires or flooding that otherwise might not be the case if people were living more compactly in the city. Living further away from the city, that has implications for people in terms of commute times. Is certainly something that contributes to people's overall unhappiness. And by virtue of not living in a very compact neighborhood, kind of miss out on opportunities for social interactions that encourage people's overall well-being and their sense of connectivity to their neighborhood. And there are some real downsides to people being lonely. It's been proven that being lonely is a potential negative health effect, like smoking cigarettes. Some of the economic benefits that have always been presumed about living in single-family homes also mask some of the potential negative side effects. There's a whole host of people who are priced out of housing, right? So if single-family homes increasing average size, increasingly expensive, there's a bunch of people who aren't going to be able to participate in sort of the wealth creation of home ownership, right? And increasingly, those people are younger people, and they're people of color, and it's a growing portion of who's living in the U.S. So that has a lot of negative economic potential impacts for our country overall. It sort of boils down to social, economic, and environmental factors that could be mitigated by people living more communally, people living closer to each other, living in kind of more walkable, bikeable neighborhoods. I think that this is starting to shift. A house that has the backyard cottage could house a loved one in, or duplex where you could rent out part of your homes or live in a multi-generational home. The tiny home, and the fact that there are HGTV shows about this, I think they're all starting to change the narrative around what a successful home looks like, or a happy home looks like. I think it's important to be able to find good examples of these styles of living that could be both prototypes and examples that people could identify themselves with.
Amazing. Well, Diana, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.